Hey, good morning, all. Josh of Severe Weather. Thanks for joining me on this Wednesday morning. Hope you all have had a great week so far. We are going to talk about the next storm, which is moving into the southwest and likely to intensify as it heads into the Gulf Coast region here over the next few days, bringing quite a bit of rain to parts of Texas and even more across Florida, where the rain is needed in some of the locations of Florida. Certainly not everywhere in Florida. Southeast Florida could say, "Hey, no rain." And then potentially a major storm that's going to head up or parallel to the East Coast here later this weekend into next week. That's going to cause some travel issues and could cause some major coastal impacts and significant rain as well. So let's take a look at what that can look like here by early next week. Maybe a major coastal storm brewing starting in the Gulf of Mexico here later this week towards Friday night and Saturday. And then springing up the Carolina coastline here later Sunday and into the Northeast early next week. Obviously, with it being about 4 to 6 days out, there's going to be some changes to the forecast. So I'm going to kind of split the uprights if that makes sense to you guys. But you can see there's certainly potential for a lot of rain, a lot of wind, and some really nasty weather for those of you that want to do some traveling early, maybe for Christmas early next week. This does not look like it's going to be a repeat of last weekend with severe weather over portions of the mid South, like Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, and North Carolina. The storm track is going to be too far south. But having said that, if you're in Florida, you do need to keep an eye on things here for maybe some potential severe weather, but certainly stronger wind for a lot of the Sunshine State, a lot of rain, and certainly the potential for a little bit of flooding as well. Here's a current look at our water vapor imagery, and this shows you kind of where the moisture is, where our storm systems are. And I'm going to kind of draw on the map here a little bit. You can see the main circulation we're watching right now is coming around this trough in the southwest, and it's very slow to move. What's going to happen is that circulation is going to drop down east southeastward, pull up some Gulf and subtropical moisture that's coming in out of the southwest aloft, and lead to low pressure forming somewhere down in here, probably over the open waters of the Gulf. What happens after that, a little bit uncertain. The reason why is there are more players on the map that we've got to be tracking. One is this trough here moving into Western Canada. That is expected to drop down in here somewhere. This upper low is going to drop down in here. The big question mark is, do they phase somewhere here in the east, or do we have two separate entities that interact with each other? The storm system last weekend did not phase, so we did not have a blockbuster storm, but the cold air came in behind it. They didn't quite link up, but the cold air came in right behind the moisture and did produce some significant snow in the higher elevations up in here. Now, does that happen again this time? I don't think so. And the reason why is we've got too much flow out of the southwest aloft. That's going to send some milder air up the coast. And instead, we're talking about a system that may be more resembling of a fall or a springtime storm system. But unfortunately, those can be very destructive for those of you on the coast, especially if we have very quickly deepening low pressure in here that tracks up in this direction. So some uncertainty, as you guys can imagine. But what has changed since those of you who watched my video on Monday is rather than this getting kicked out to sea from Florida, it looks like it's going to come up the Carolina coast and then maybe up the Northeast coast or close by to the Northeast. And there's a small chance this storm system could find its way up through the spine of the Appalachians as well and bring that rain farther west. But right now, I think more a problem for the coastal states. So here's a look at the upper level pattern. This is the European model from weatherbell.com. And you can see our low pressure here over the southwest, heading into Texas here late tomorrow night, early on Friday. Another trough moving through Alberta and Canada. And you can see the two are trying to interact with each other here by Friday night. We also see lowering pressures over the Gulf of Mexico and lowering heights as well. So kind of two separate upper level features, but if they do try to phase, we can have a significant storm that moves up into the Carolinas on Sunday and then up the East Coast on Monday. What we're watching behind this is, do we have a large ridge of high pressure that tries to build in on top of it and stalls the system next week? Or do we have a system that's more progressive and kicks out? The European says it's going to be hanging out just off the East Coast later next week. And then the next feature is going to be moving into California towards the 22nd and 23rd. And that could be something we have to track here for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day over the central states and eventually the eastern states. But I don't want to get into that just yet. Let's worry about the first storm first. Here's the GFS model and cut off low pressure system over Texas here Friday. It's cut off from this main upper level branch. You can see the closed circles here indicating that it's not connected to that northern branch feature. And cut off low pressure systems, as those of you who track weather can maybe understand, are a lot more tricky and a lot more difficult to figure out because they get cut off from the faster winds aloft. they get what we call is kind of stuck from the main upper level pattern. And stuck systems are the ones that are often the most unpredictable. Now you can see on the GFS here, there is some phasing that tries to happen here on Monday, and that allows this system to come up more to the north and west than the European shows. In fact, I don't think this particular model is going to get it right, but it shows such a strong region of high pressure that the low pressure that's coming up the southeast coast kind of gets stuck here all of next week. Now, that's just one model run. Eventually, it kicks it out, but it's going to take some time to do that. But you can notice there's a pretty big difference here on the 22nd between the GFS, which has this just off the Carolina coast, and the European, which has it several hundred miles away over Bermuda and over the Bahamas. Which one is correct? Again, the answer is I don't know. So I'll be upfront with you guys on that. But either way, prolonged bad weather for the East Coast looks possible here as we get later into the week. So here's our storm system now. We're going to see snow falling in the higher elevations of the Southwest and maybe some lightning strikes in Arizona, New Mexico, and West Texas here, even into tonight. This system, though, gets stuck. It's cut off. We are going to see some heavier showers moving through North Texas. Dallas, Fort Worth sees this rain Friday later in the morning into lunchtime, but then it's out later Friday night and dry by Saturday. But you can see here's our low pressure system. The GFS has it buried all the way down close to the Yucatan Peninsula. It does have bands of rain, though, moving through South Florida here over the next couple of days. It's going to get wet here in Miami and Fort Lauderdale over the next 24 hours and stay that way. Now, GFS has this low deepening to almost tropical storm strength, 987 millibars by Saturday night, and draws all the moisture on the northern side of it. So all the business here is north and east. By the time the low lifts out, we actually see a bit of dry air aloft punching in, which is not going to be favorable for any kind of severe weather, but will be favorable for strong winds at the coast and for heavy amounts of rain north and east of this center. So southwestern Florida, Tampa Bay area, Orlando on Saturday could have a complete washout. And the rain is very much going to be beneficial for those of you on the West Coast here, but we may have a little bit of severe weather somewhere in here on Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening. The rain is going to lift away from South Florida, but you're going to get drenched here over the next 3 to 4 days. Then we see the heavy rain moving up the spine of the Appalachians and primarily the Midlands on east in South Carolina and the coastal plain of North Carolina and Eastern Virginia here get the threat for the heaviest rain. That's not to say that we couldn't see heavy rain across the Piedmont or even the Blue Ridge into the Shenandoah Valley here Sunday night into Monday. And there's still some timing differences here on how this is going to move out to the north and east. Could be quicker, could be slower, but the slower it is, the more potential we have for heavy rain and prolonged strong wind. As we get to early next week on Monday, the GFS continues to indicate this rain moves up into New England. We do have a high pressure system that does send colder air down through Quebec into northern New England. And the big question mark, as we always see here with coastal lows, is does the cold air catch up with the milder, more subtropical moisture in place? And the GFS does some really funky stuff here. It keeps the low around. And this is kind of an anomaly. Even if you go back one model run, it doesn't look the same way. I'll show you that here just a bit. GFS has the low tracking up into eastern North Carolina. It does have a little bit of wintry weather getting stuck over northern New England and Quebec. This happens to be ice and sleet. I really hope that's not the case, but you've got a massive area of high pressure, 1,057 millibars, and a decent sized low pressure system, 1,003. When you got that 50 millibar difference, you can have some pretty strong winds stuck in between the two. So Atlantic Canada, Maine down to Massachusetts, we need to keep an eye on the wind. We also have to keep an eye on this sneaky cold air mass because it could lead to some wintry trouble here. But again, I'm not seeing a lot of consistency from run to run. We're going to see this changing a million times until we finally get this out of here. This is the look at the GFS from yesterday afternoon, and it doesn't show the moisture getting up into Maine. It has a little bit of junk here off of Massachusetts and Maine later next week. But I guess the bottom line is this system could hang around here much of next week. And until it's kicked offshore, which some of the other models show, it's going to be a potential headache for us. So something we're going to be tracking for a while here. The European model, you can see, is a little more progressive here with the rain. It moves it out of Dallas here pretty quickly down in Louisiana. Let me take this down for you guys to see here, but not as strong with the low and farther south. But this actually is more of a severe weather look for South Florida because instead of a 987 low coming up into Northeast Florida, it's got a deepening low that's moving through South Florida and then reforming off the southeast coast. This could mean some very hazardous weather for the Outer Banks for eastern South Carolina. for eastern Georgia and eventually up into the mid-Atlantic states here. The time frame on this is Sunday evening. This is going to be Monday morning into Monday afternoon, and just shows a ton of rain coming up through New England. The cold air does come in behind it, but it's very brief. This is like the last storm, but kind of less when it comes to winter weather. And you can see it's getting windy and colder, but drying out in time for Tuesday and Wednesday. And all the storminess remains over the open waters of the Atlantic. Maybe Bermuda's got a lot of rain to mess with here next week, but much different than the GFS, which camps out a week too long compared to the European. Now, I'm going to show you the middle road here, the Canadian model, and this is not necessarily the correct model. It's pretty aggressive, but it's kind of splitting the uprights between the GFS and the European. It does phase these two troughs together. We do have rain across northwest Texas here tomorrow night, some snow in the higher elevations, and then rain moving through Dallas Friday into Friday afternoon. Then the rain moves down into Louisiana on Saturday. And it does have our low pressure system moving right through the Florida Peninsula, which means we definitely have the threat for some severe weather and flooding, especially in South Florida here Saturday into Saturday night. It takes the low right up the coast and deepens it significantly. It's interacting with this trough that's dropping down from Western Canada, merging with the southern branch feature and allowing this low pressure system to develop very quickly into a nor'easter. The pressure's down to 981. This could be very hazardous for the Outer Banks, for New Jersey, for Delaware, eastern Maryland, right up into southern New England, due to the fact that that low pressure is kind of bombing out. See how it goes from 997 here on Sunday morning and afternoon down to 976 millibars off the Jersey Shore Monday. So almost a 30 millibar, 25 millibar drop in pressure in 24 hours. And this would be very bad for New England. It'll be a faster moving, more progressive system, but it's going to hit very hard as it does so and then lifts out here on Tuesday. So this is not my official forecast. This is something I could see working, but only if the northern branch feature merges with the southern branch, the two phase together, and then that kicks things out here pretty quickly. The good news, though, if this Canadian is right, is that things are going to be very quiet here in the 4 or 5 days leading up to Christmas, and then we start to watch what's coming in from the west here towards the following weekend. So let's look at wind potential. And again, this by no means is an official forecast. These are just model guidance that give us kind of a feel for what could happen depending on storm tracks. And you see it gets windy in Florida here, especially southeast and southwest Florida, maybe not the interior, but more the coastal sections here with gusts over 30 miles per hour. Then those winds start ramping up on the central Gulf Coast states. South Louisiana by Friday night, winds may gust over 40 miles per hour. This isn't as strong as what we saw a couple days ago, but it's still pretty windy. And then as we head into Saturday afternoon, winds start ramping up over 40 miles per hour over western Florida and higher amounts over the Gulf. You can see as we get to Saturday night, if the GFS track is correct, there are potential wind gusts over 50 miles per hour all the way up to about Atlanta, Georgia, and Augusta and Savannah across North Florida. So if this solution is correct, we could be talking about a significant area that has some power outages and some tree limbs coming down here over the weekend. Then those winds move up the North Carolina coast here Sunday night. And I'll show you the Northeast in just a little bit. But these are some significant wind gusts if this run of the GFS is right. Doesn't mean it is, of course. Here's the European. And we see a little bit less in the way of strong wind and more of the wind actually just off the coast. But the Outer Banks are getting hit hard. Northeast Florida, places like Flagler Beach, we're looking at wind gusts of 50 miles per hour. Fernandina Beach, maybe 60 miles per hour. So definitely still a lot of wind to talk about, just kind of a different trajectory here and a different area that gets the heaviest wind. And then the mountains could get some heavy wind as well. The Canadian splits the two. And that's the one, of course, that has the more intense low pressure system. So take a look at some of these winds here. Not as windy across Georgia, only 20 to 30 miles per hour. So it's got the coastal track, not the inland track, which is good for us here. But it definitely has some powerful wind coming up the mouth of the Chesapeake. Wind gusts over 60 miles per hour Monday morning. And then farther north, we have some pretty intense wind as well. So that could work out, or it could be completely different. All we know at this point is this low has the potential to strengthen quickly due to the fact that there's some strong upper level dynamics. And just north of that low pressure track, especially on the coast, there's some potential for some significant wind, 50, 60, maybe 70 mile per hour wind gusts. But again, really too early to try to make that immediate call. It's going to be something I think in a couple of days we're going to have a better handle on, hopefully. Here's a look at the GFS for the Northeast. It is going to be windy here with this trough swinging through, bringing another push of cold air the next couple of days. That's not our main storm, though. Here's the main storm. And Monday morning, we have potential wind gusts of 60 miles per hour on Hatteras, 40 to 50 miles per hour for Jersey, and maybe 60 to 70 mile per hour gusts once again for southeastern Massachusetts, the islands, coastal Maine, right up through New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. These will be about 105, 115 kilometer per hour wind gusts here Monday into Monday night, if the GFS is correct. The European is not going to be as strong on the East Coast here. In fact, only showing 40 to 50 mile per hour wind gusts. So that's what we're kind of pulling for here if you're in Cape Cod. But the wind gusts do pick up quite a bit in the same places around the Bay of Fundy here Monday night into Tuesday. So that's what we're watching. And then the Canadian model, which has the intense low pressure forming, is going to be the windiest, especially offshore, with the potential for wind gusts over 85, 90 miles per hour. But for the coastal areas, we could still see wind gusts over 50, maybe even over 60 miles per hour. And then take a look at this hurricane force wind gusts possible on Cape Cod as we get to Monday afternoon into Monday evening. Still some gusty winds here. So uncertainty, as you guys can see here, but potential, the ceiling is pretty high here if this does come together. It's also possible we could just get a scare and the worst of that wind stays offshore, and that's what we're rooting for. The rain, though, that's going to be a challenge for us to forecast here. You can see the anomalies are super high across Florida. They are higher across the East Coast, but we don't know exactly yet where the heaviest rain is going to be. What I will guarantee is that Tennessee Valley is dry this weekend. The Great Lakes are dry. We do see that heavy rain over the southern plains. Eventually, the Southwest gets wet and the Northwest is dry, but California gets pretty wet here next week as well. Looking at the national blend of models, I'm just going to take the average of everything because I don't know exactly who's going to get it. You can see significant rain coming in places that do need it here over the southern plains. Some wet weather as well over South Texas. This is tonight into tomorrow. Potential for over an inch of rain around College Station and Dallas, but less, unfortunately, San Antonio to Del Rio. And then you can see these winds the rains amounts are picking up in Louisiana. Generally speaking, about an inch of rain or so. Most of it is going to be more geared towards Florida than it will be Louisiana. Here's the rest of the Southeast. And we already do see some significant rain. This is a blend of everything. We're seeing an inch or two in the Keys, 3 to 4 inches in Southeast Florida here, as that moisture just pushes right up against this stalled boundary here in South Florida. So very wet once again in Southeast Florida. That's the last thing you guys really want to see. But the good news is Southwest Florida that does need the rain is going to get some, maybe 2 to 4 inches of rain here by Sunday evening. Southeast Florida, unfortunately, those amounts could get up very close to 10 inches in some areas, depending on where this low goes. This is a blend of all the models. So if you see 7 inches in Miami, that means one model's probably going 4, one's probably going 12, and the in-betweens are probably going 7 or 8. But you can see significant rain comes all the way up here. I don't think we're going to see much in the Tennessee Valley. I think it's very limited. East Tennessee, maybe. North Georgia, certainly. But you can still see some amounts here that, especially on Sunday and Sunday night into early Monday, do get up to 2 or 3 inches on the coastal plain of the Carolinas. So once again, we're unlucky on our Sundays and early Mondays with significant amounts of rain. This time, though, I don't think we're talking severe weather, but this is going to be a big soaker for those of us here in the Southeast. The Northeast is going to be a lot more challenging to predict. As you can see here, a blend of the models takes the rain up late Sunday night into the Mid-Atlantic region and then Monday. And I think most of this is rain. But even New England sees 1 to maybe 2 inches of rain. There's some potential for more, some for less. All that depends on where this low ends up going. As I've probably said 20 times, you're probably ready to turn me off because it sounds like a broken record. But again, I just like to look at kind of the average of everything and give you guys kind of an idea that we're going to see a range here, but some significant rain coming here for early next week. Snow in the shorter term, we are going to see a little bit of snow here with this trough coming down, maybe 3 or 4 inches of snow in parts of upstate New York, into parts of Ontario, lesser amounts in parts of central and northern New England, although we could see a bit even in the Rhode Island and Massachusetts. This is with the HER. Then as we look longer term into the GFS here, we do see some funky stuff here going on in the Mid-Atlantic. I'll touch on that in a minute, but the potential where as the cold air catches up here, we could see a few inches, maybe more in northern Maine and New Brunswick and parts of eastern Quebec, but limited amounts here when we get to the majority of the Northeast. The higher elevations could see a little bit. This is just if this low tries to back in and suck up some cold air. I'm not going to promise that to you guys, so don't study this too hard. It's going to change 100 more times. But, you know, we'll have to keep an eye on the interior here. Maybe the higher elevations do pick up a little bit of snow towards Tuesday and Wednesday of next week if this low is still around the coast. European is not showing that solution, though, by the way. Shows a little bit in the higher elevations of West Virginia early on Monday. But then you can see, generally speaking, as the cold air wraps into this system, a few inches possible in northern New Brunswick, southeast Quebec, and northern Maine, maybe a little bit as well into the Green and White Mountains, but not a big snowfall here. This is going to be kind of a milder storm coming in off the waters rather than phasing with the cold air. The Canadian model does show a little bit of snow potential, but it's much farther west. As you remember, that low on the Canadians coming right up the coast. The other models are kind of hugging the coast, but a little bit offshore. And if this model is correct, we could see some accumulating snow all the way into eastern Tennessee, western North Carolina, straight up the spine of the Appalachians up into Quebec. The Canadian is pretty aggressive with this. I don't know if this will happen or not, but shows some snow getting into New England here late Monday night into Tuesday and maybe early on Wednesday. Temperatures are going to remain below average here for a couple more days in the east. They will moderate by the weekend. Where it's cloudy, where this low is tracking, though, it should be below average over the weekend across the mid-Atlantic states. We'll see milder air working into Florida. It's going to get more humid here over the weekend. The Northeast will temporarily be mild before this low comes up. It could get a little cooler, but we don't know quite yet how that plays out. Probably Tuesday into Wednesday of next week. Chilly in the Southeast, so no blowtorch coming for us. I think the blowtorch is in the Rockies and Plains, and we're kind of back and forth in the East here heading into Christmas Eve. But notice on the European control, we are not exactly warm for Christmas. We're still below average, but doesn't guarantee that we're going to have a winter storm. It just means we're not going to be persistently warm. We'll have bouts where it's cold for a few days and it warms up, then it gets cold again, like we've seen much of this month. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. Temperatures, the national blend of the models, going to be kind of raw here on Friday in Texas and Oklahoma, 40s, low 50s, warmer for the Gulf. Turning cooler in Louisiana and Arkansas for the first part of the weekend, as you guys might imagine here. And then, excuse me, warming right back up here early next week as we see that milder than average air in place across the plains here. I'm sorry, I'm not showing the whole country, but mid 40s around Chicago next week around this time, 50s around Kansas City and St. Louis. Looking at the Southeast here, still cool today and especially tomorrow in the mid-Atlantic region, then moderating some, but it's not necessarily going to be warm. The interior of the Piedmont may get stuck in the 40s and low 50s here Sunday into Monday with rain. So it is going to warm up in Florida. We're not going to be hot. We're going to be a little warmer. But generally speaking, we're going to have some chillier nights coming here as this low backs away here Tuesday and Wednesday. And kind of a cool look to next week, although moderating on the Gulf Coast. Finally, in the Northeast, I apologize for skipping past the Great Lakes. Y'all are going to be a little above average, but still on the cool side. But you can see here, we're warming up over the weekend, 40s and 50s in the Northeast, 30s in interior New England. As that low comes up the coast, it does shoot some milder air back. So we're going to be above average, but we're not going to be warm. And then as that colder air mass builds in from New England, we could be pretty darn chilly here across the Maritimes into northern New England Tuesday into Wednesday before starting to rebound here late next week. But overall, we're not looking at anything like last Christmas where it's brutally cold. We're looking at more seasonal temperatures, but there will be some variation coming. Thank you all so much for your time today. If you enjoyed this video and you're not a subscriber yet, I encourage you to do so and share with your friends. I am a meteorologist. My goal is to help everybody be prepared for potentially bad weather. It's a challenging field to be in. I've done this for over 20 years, but I do my very best to bring to your attention impactful weather that's going to cause some widespread issues and take a look at longer term forecasts. Here's the end credit. So I give all the credit to God, to Jesus Christ, our Savior. He is the one that has gifted me with these talents to be able to share with you all. And I feel called and feel like it's my obligation to just share the good news with you guys. That the God has given us all life. Every day is not a guarantee, but if you're here today, that is a blessing from God. And I just want to share with you guys a quick verse, Psalm 121, King James Version. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, which made heaven and earth. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is thy keeper. The Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve thee from all evil. He shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in from this time forth and even forevermore. Preserving your soul is what the Christian lifestyle is all about. Accepting that Jesus died on the cross, he rose again, so that we could live eternally with him. That is our preservation, our souls being saved. I didn't know this until I was 30 years old. I knew what Christians believe, but I didn't quite understand things. But the Lord has blessed me so much doors opened for me, and I was finally able to see my worth in God, not go off of what other people saw me as, or how much money I made, or where I was working, or any of that stuff. That stuff's important to us. Don't get me wrong, in the world's eyes, but in God's eyes, what really matters is that relationship with Him through Jesus Christ. I pray you have that relationship, but if you do not, I'm not going to judge you. Just know that I am happy to pray for anybody with whatever situation you're going through, and that all good things come from above, and that your help comes from the Lord. If you need help, I would love to pray for you guys, because I believe asking God, and more people coming to God asking for the help for one person, is very powerful. So I pray that you guys have a wonderful day. We'll chat again tomorrow morning. Take care and be safe. See you then.